Okay, by Mr. Marcel Moyse. I have developed a process by which I go through this entire book and I direct my students to go through the book this way. Some of it is going to be very intuitive, some of it you might already do yourself. I just find, though, that by offering an exceptionally organized way to go through it that has clearly defined ideas in terms of what we're working on in each exercise is very helpful. I also reorder the book so that it's not going to come at us in the exact same order that it appears in the printed book. So we're going to have a little bit of interactiveness today. I'm going to discuss how some of the exercises are. I'm hoping that everyone will then experience the exercise and then we can ask questions or have a little bit of discussion based on how all of that goes. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can present my slideshow here. There we go. Okay, mapping Moyse a treasure hunt. Let me make it so I can see my screen. There we go. All right, so I wanted to include this quote at the very beginning. I long ago observed that the real beauty of the sound comes from the generosity of the heart. This is by Mr. Marcel Moyse. The goal here is that we are going to be searching through mountains and valleys and peaks and hills, all sorts of different things to find the hidden treasure within our own bodies to create our own beautiful sounds. So we're going to start with our hot air balloon ride. In order to get to where we need to start this entire process, we have to start with the most important thing that produces air, or tone, excuse me, which is, of course, our air. Everyone talks about this as flute players, but not everyone necessarily talks about how to start your day thinking of the air. So the very first thing that I want to do with you all is define support. We all know that support means to push generally from the diaphragm. But what I learned from my students is that not a lot of them understand the diaphragm is an involuntary muscle. We can't control our diaphragms, right? It moves as a reaction to our breathing. And we're not that far away from when we were all locked away in our own homes and all control was taken away from us. So I say to my students, why would I ask you to support your instrument from a place that you don't have control over? Wouldn't we rather know, understand, and control that support just a little bit better? So first, we're going to redefine where the center of support is. Everyone can find their belly button and put their finger up just an inch above that belly button. This is where I think of the center of support as being. Now, I know this might feel a little high. A lot of us, I think, are used to thinking of support as being lower, where singers put it, kind of more below the belly button. My problem with that is sometimes I need my support to increase for various things. Sometimes, though, I also need my air support to drop and lower for various things. And if I'm supporting from too low of a place, then there's nowhere for that support to drop and create space when I need it to. Vice versa, if you're supporting up here by the rib cage, you have nowhere to increase that support if you need to increase the support. So that inch above the belly button is where the center of the support is, and that's where I want you to consider blowing from. So that's why my next bullet point says blow air from the belly. One more thing I want to point out, I have written in here circle of breath. This is a breathing concept that I teach to my students in order to make sure that we're breathing full and deep and not inviting tension into ourselves starting from breathing. I find that myself even, or a lot of my students, will start breathing this way, and then their shoulders raise and we get all this tension up here, and you're already starting from a place that you don't want to be. So I think of the breath as coming more in a circle. The idea here is, and you are all welcome to trace this with me, the idea here is that the air comes in through our mouths, and then I think of it going all the way to the back of the throat. And from there, I trace that circle down to my lower back. That's where I actually think of the air tank as being, that I am keeping everything in. That's where we're going to release our hot air from today to make sure that our balloon can get off the ground. That way it can come forward to the point of support in order to be blown back out. If you all take a nice breath with me and trace this circle, we'll do 4 counts to get into our tank and then 4 counts to blow the air out. I want you to pay attention to the way that the top half of your body feels when we breathe this way. So we're going to start by tracing into our tank for 4 counts, then pushing out for 4 counts. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and let's do one more. Now, I'm hoping we're going to be able to have a little bit of interaction today. Did anyone notice how your shoulders felt through that breathing process if you were able to do it? And
Relax.
I will go for it.
They felt relaxed. I wasn't paying attention to them at all.
Yes, relaxed, not paying attention to them at all. Exactly. So we're now breathing down into our support system, which means we can access our air better when we need to blow it out through the belly. Okay, so keep this breathing in mind as we go through this first exercise. It is going to be called an air attack exercise. We're going to do it 3 different ways. We're going to do it separated. Then we're going to be doing slurring 2 notes at a time up, then 2 notes at a time down. And then we'll slur the whole thing. The goal here is that we are starting the sound with the air, not with our embouchures, not with our throats, not with our tongues. This is going to feel strange if you are used to using these things in order to create the air movement, okay? So remember, as we go through this exercise, minimal lip and minimal jaw movement. We are not worried about quality of sound at the onset of this regimen that I'm going to take us through. We are just worried about making sure we know how much air we need to create the sound and how much pressure we need from our bellies to make the sound happen in different registers. So we see here, this is on, I believe, page 15. Page numbers up at the top of my picture, very luckily. 15 and 16 in Mr. Moyse's book. So I'm not going to start with the long tone exercises at the very beginning. I'm not going to start from a place of requiring my lips to grab onto the air and force it to do something. Instead, we're going to start together from a place of just using the air with levity to get the sound going. So everyone can grab their flutes. If you've got your flutes handy, we're going to play through this together. You can see number 1 down at the bottom. We're going to do number 1 as it appears in the first exercise with every single note separated. But again, the trick here is that we're not using our tongues to create the sound. We're also not using the lips, so no p, p to create the sound. We are literally just going ha, ha, ha from that center of support. Let me demonstrate 2 of these notes before we all do it together. You'll notice that I'm not worried about how loud it is. I'm not worried about how pretty it is. I'm not even really worried about whether or not it's in tune. I just want to feel what speed the air needs to be going to get those notes to come out. So if you have your flutes, go ahead and pick them up. And we're going to go through this entire exercise together, each individual note from the belly with ha's. And then I'm going to want to know how your experience is with this. Here we go. 1, 2, ready? I should have said before I started, my flute goes to a low B, so I tend to take these exercises down to low B. However, I have pretty strong feelings that high C sharp and high D require things of our lips and embouchure and air. I don't want to include those when I'm warming up. There's just a little bit too much tension that invites into our sounds. So I would love a little bit of feedback. If any of you were able to do this exercise, what was your experience of creating sound in this way? And anyone can feel free to unmute. I'm not really able to see the chat very well. Yes, please.
It was very free and unencumbered.
Yeah, and how frequently does the flute feel when you play that way?
Not as often as I would like for it to.
Yeah, absolutely. So this offers freedom with the air. Yeah. Anyone else have any comment to make? I enjoy that comment very much because, yes, the idea behind this warm up regimen, behind the way that I go through my books with my students, is reminding us that sound should be easy. The details of sound might be difficult, but the creation of sound itself is easy if you remember where that sound is being created from. One little thing I did forget to mention before I started is as you go through the exercise of individual notes, you want to be careful in the low register that we're not slapping down our fingers to make the note come out. This doesn't mean that that's not something that you could do somewhere else. If that's something that a teacher has told you to do, or if you find sometimes you want a little key slap to help that low register. But in this exercise, the idea is that even low D, the notes will still come out if you use the air. They might not be as instantaneous, but as you continue to explore this process, you'll find the angle that the air needs to go. So now we've just blown the air straight across. We've gotten every single note to come out. We need to connect the dots between what needs to happen in the pressure of our belly as we go up and down the registers. So we're going to start on our F, and we're going to slur up to each note from F like you see in second exercise on your screens. So we're always going to start on the F, and we're going to slur up to the next note. So F to F sharp, F to G, F to G sharp. And again, try to keep the lips out of it. Try to do all of this simply with the air speed from the belly. And every time you breathe, think of that circle of breath filling up that tank down here in the back of your lower back. Here we go. Bottom, bottom. That'll be the tempo we take. 1, 2, ready? Now we start on the F and we go down just like we went up. If we need to increase air pressure and speed to go up, then we need to relax and release air pressure and speed to go down. 1, 2, starting on F. All right, would anyone like to make a comment on what that experience was like? If not, that's okay. Okay, so hopefully it is my intention that what you felt was if you kept the air exactly the same the whole way, some of the higher notes aren't going to come out or some of the lower notes aren't going to come out, right? The idea here is as we're slurring up and down these intervals, we feel that the air speed needs to change in order to support the interval itself. Notice that I'm really, really trying hard to not talk about what the embouchure does in these instances. Because if we think about everything as embouchure centric, right, then about 10 minutes into your practicing, you're not going to be able to have a nice sound anymore. It's going to be going, you'll be using nothing but lip to create the sound. In this way, we're always starting from the root of the sound, which is the air. Now, to complete this exercise, we go back and we play the entire exercise the way that you see it written, slurred all the way up and slurred all the way down, trying to keep the jaw in a nice, stable place so that it is the air pressure from the belly that is creating the interval, not the chewing, chomping, and moving of the jaw that's creating the interval. We'll do this together as well. Ba-dee-da-dee. We won't go too fast. You can breathe literally wherever you want to. Literally, you can breathe wherever you want to. 1, 2, ready? Now, when I do this exercise by myself, I don't necessarily go quite that slow. I go a little faster, but I didn't want to rush anyone through. I would play the exercise more like this speed, though. I just find that the speed helps me to remain focusing on that airstream. I would love feedback how everyone feels doing these intervals who might be able to play today after the other 2 exercises that we did before. Does anyone have any comments to make about those intervals now that we've done a little playing?
I found myself going back to old habits somewhere in the middle of it, trying to use my lips. And so it was good to notice and have control over that.
Yeah, and because you just spoke, I want to ask, how frequently do you allow yourself like that slow thought process to pay attention to what's happening here as you're starting your sound every day?
Not a whole lot. I've actually been doing a lot of long tones lately to start, and so it's a good idea to start from the place of attack of the note. It's a really interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, the whole point of long tones is to make a pretty sound, and the whole point of having a pretty sound is to have that come from your air. Yes, thank you. Does anyone else have any comments they'd like to make?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Since we brought long tones into the conversation. So are you proposing that we begin first thing in our practice session with this exercise and not do long tones? Because I missed that, if that's what you said.
I am not proposing that we don't do long tones because the next thing that we're going to do is long tones. But yes, you're absolutely correct. I am proposing that this is how you start every day. so that instead of starting from a point of trying to force a pretty sound into the flute, which is what I think a lot of people do when they play long tones, they use their lips to try to force a pretty sound into the flute, right? The idea here is that we're not starting from that process. We're actually checking in with our bodies to make sure that our bodies are in the right place. I mean, how many times have you had a weird tone day and you realize that it's a weird tone day because you ate too much salt the night before, and maybe your lips are a little different than they were yesterday, and you have to move the flute to a different place? Or if you're like me and you're in Michigan and it's the dead middle of a January winter, it is so freaking dry that your lips are constantly falling off of your face. I find that reminding myself that the air creates the tone, I'm able to overcome some of those things quite a bit easier than if I just put my flute together and try to create an instantly beautiful sound. I also think I failed to mention at the beginning that what I'm building here for you is a 4-week practice regimen using this book. That'll become more evident as we go through it. But if you look at this exercise, if you happen to have your Moyse book handy, this is exercise 1 of 30 something, right? Yeah, 31. There are 31 of this kind of exercise in the book, and every day it's starting on a different note. It starts on F today. Tomorrow it would start on F sharp. The next day it would start on E. So you're always starting this exercise from a new note, and even though not every month has 31 days, you're literally starting on each different registered note throughout the whole process. So in week 1, you would do the first 7 of these, 1 on day 1, 2 on day 2, 3 on day 3, etc. That way you're not always starting your sound from one place either. Sometimes we're starting in the high register, sometimes we're starting in the low register. Hopefully that clears up a couple of questions. Are there any other questions before I push into the next section?
Hi.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Wilton. So, earlier on, you mentioned that we should always avoid starting our practice session with the higher register. So, assuming that on your 7-week journey, assuming you start on a high note. So, I had some problems basically on the starting on the G sharp. There's exercise 30, starting on a G sharp actually. Yeah. So, do we avoid it first, or we just go on with it?
I'm pretty sure I can answer your question this way. What I like about the way this book is set up, Mr. Moyse's book is set up, the first week you're almost always starting in this kind of middle register. So the idea here is if you're practicing this consistently for 4 weeks, it won't make that big of a difference when you're starting in the higher or lower register. That's part 1 of my answer to your question. To more directly answer, I think when teachers tell us not to start practicing from the high register, they're talking about what I was talking about a moment ago, this idea that if you start with long tones, specifically in the high register, you're putting a lot of pressure on your lips to grip onto that airstream to force it to be pretty right away. The way that I have you go through this exercise, though, we're not using the lips as intensely to create the sound. So even if I started on G sharp, to use the note that you talked about, I'm hardly using my lips to create that sound. There only needs to be enough embouchure for the note to speak, if that makes sense. So we're not in danger of hurting the lips in this way. Does that help answer your question, Wilton?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions before I move on? Awesome. And of course, the idea behind this is you can mold it to yourself. So if you find that after week 1, continuing this specific exercise up into the stratosphere and down into the lowest of lows is too difficult to start, then you can, of course, just repeat the first 7 exercises again to make this easier. I do generally like to start in the middle register myself, unless I'm doing this consistently for the whole 4 weeks. So I wouldn't, on day 1 of week 1, pick a high G as my starting point, for example. I always start with this F. Okay, we've got our hot air going. Our air has now filled our balloon, which means we can lift up into the air and travel to our next destination on our treasure hunt of sound here. So we're going to move over to the dynamic mountains. This is probably one of my favorite sections of the class that I'm going to give, the dynamic mountains. So there's several things for us to keep in mind. Number 1, now that we've got our sound going, generally speaking, adding in the details is going to be a lot easier, and it won't come from a place of burden on the embouchure. I'm going to talk a lot about that today. The idea behind this process is to try to take burden off of the embouchure to create sound. We want to always make sure from here forward that we're working towards good intonation. It's literally in the word, intonation. If you have a good tone that is working correctly, generally speaking, it's going to be a lot easier to settle it into a pitch center or have it be in tune. Vice versa, if you are able to settle into a pitch center and be in tune, your sound will generally automatically be better. So I find with my students that when their sounds start to get too spread, or if they get that that wonderful sound that some of our young students get when they're playing soft, and it's like, right? That means that they didn't focus on the idea of being in tune to start, and so the support is changing and the pitch changes, and then the tone isn't good, right? And then also the pitch isn't good. So from here on forward, we are always going to be working with a tuner. I like to make this easy by doing loud and then soft. Loud and then soft. I'm not necessarily going for fortissimo and pianissimo. I'm just going for generally loud and generally soft. Again, to take the burden off of the lips at the beginning of my practice session for the day. And depending on where each of us is in our flute life and our flute journeys, right, the amount that you are putting your flute on your face each day, the amount of time, it's different for each of us. So for me personally, if I have to play for upwards of, let's say, 6 to 8 hours a day, which is probably close to what a normal playing day is for me, 6 to 8 hours of playing, I don't want to start my day tearing my lips apart trying to do all of these things. I'd rather have that happen at the end of the day when I'm trying to hold on to the last little whatever I'm trying to give to my day, if that makes sense. Here is where I will have us turn back to the beginning of the book to look at number 1. My mouse has disappeared. There we go. And what I like about Mr. Moyse's book is you'll see all of these separations. We start by having everything be just 1 note, 2 note slur, right? 2 note chromatic. And there's 2 lines of that. You'll notice that I've marked out in this first week of practice, there are actually 6 days worth of exercise. This is going to become important as we continue through the book and I show you how all the other exercises can fit into a week, basically. So I would do number 1 on day 1, I would do number 2 on day 2, number 3 on day 3, and then by the time I get to Saturday, and I usually repeat day 6 on day 7, so 6 is also 7, I'm doing basically top all the way down to the bottom loud and then top all the way down to the bottom soft. It will take way less time than going through number 1 in order to make sure that we have enough lip for the added exercises at the end of the week. And again, as we continue through the book, I'll show you how I'm cycling these things in, okay? Now I'm gonna move this over so that you can all see actually week 4. And there's a good reason why I'm doing this. Everything in this process is building on itself. So in week 1, I am starting loud and then playing soft. And there's only one exercise because everything is chromatic, right? So it's loud first, soft second. In week 2, because the interval changes in these long tone exercises, if you have the book, you can look at number 2 in the first of these exercises. We go from half steps to whole steps. You have to do this twice. First, starting on the B natural, and then starting on the B flat. So in week 2, I reverse this. Number 1, starting on the B natural, is loud to soft, just like week 1. But then when I start on the B flat, I will do soft, followed immediately by loud. And what I'm doing throughout the week, throughout these 4 weeks then, is I'm challenging my embouchure to start in different places with the airstream that we set up at the beginning of this process, if that makes sense. Then in week number 3, we add a third thing, and that is starting loud with a diminuendo, and then starting soft with a crescendo. And then week 4, which we are all going to do together today because I wanted to give you all an example of what this would feel like. What we're going to do is we are going to do number 1 together today. It's going to be the first line, the B to the G to the E flat will be loud, and then we'll repeat soft. Then on the A sharp to F sharp line, we're going to start soft and repeat loud. On the A to F natural line, we're going to do a diminuendo. So we'll start loud and then diminuendo on the F. And then on the 4th line, because I'm extra and I can't have anything be that simple, it's always got to have just a little bit of zhuzh to it, we're going to start soft and feel what it's like to crescendo through all of this. I want you to notice that I built this 4-week process. So we start in week 1 by focusing just on loud and just on soft in these exercises that are coming down and building upon them. So it's not until week 4 that we get this intense. Again, though, we'll play through some of week 4 together today because that is, I want everyone to experience the fullness of what we're doing. So I have my tuner handy over here. If you all also happen to have your tuners, you are welcome to use them. If I don't show up as in tune over Zoom, I'm just apologizing in advance. I can't always control what the internet does to sound, but I assure you I'm trying hard over here with my metronome. And I don't know if you can see my cursor. Oops. But I would like to go all the way over to where I have the number 4 written. So this first exercise we'll do together will be starting all the way down at the end of the first line. We're going to play it loud. We're going to hold the last note out for at least 3 beats. We'll take a breath, remembering our circle of breath, filling up the tank from the back, and then we'll play soft. It'll be nice and slow. Here we go. 1, 2, ready? Wonderful. Now, before we do the next line, the first thing that I want to point out is our support. Remember how I said at the very beginning of our time together, I thought of support as being an inch above the belly button? Well, for this first exercise, I'm either going to keep my support at the belly button or let it drop just a little below the belly button because we're playing loud. And then when we go soft, I'm going to let the support raise up from there so that the pitch can also stay up. We historically go flat when we play soft, and we historically go sharp when we play loud. This is why I said at the very beginning, I think of support as being a little more mobile than other people think of it. So we're going to start on the A sharp, nice and soft, and I want you to imagine that your support has moved 2 inches above your belly button. And then when we go to play loud, put your support back down to the belly button. Here we go. 1, 2, ready? Okay. I have a concept I want to talk about before we get to the next section. So does anyone have any comments or questions from what we just talked about?
Do you have a sheet where you go through the your sequences?
Do you mean like a sheet of basically what I'm presenting today?
Yes, yes, like
I
a
don't
guide.
have one. I don't have one handy, but I am happy to provide you with one if you'd like one. So anyone who's on the call that would like what you're asking for is welcome to email me at blepage BLEPAGE at oakland.edu. And I am happy. I do have a page that I put together for notes to give you all to help with this. Yes. Okay, so to save a little bit of time, we're not going to go through the last two of this exercise because I want to show you what comes on next. Let me just check in the chat here. Yes, here, I will put the email right in the chat. So there we go. And yes, I teach at Oakland University, but Oakland University in Detroit, Michigan, not Oakland University in California. I do get that question all the time. Okay, so we hit our dynamic mountains. We have now gotten to the next thing that we need to get to. So we've taken our hot air balloon ride all the way over to our secret island where our golden tone is waiting for us. We have now climbed up and down the mountains to get all of our louds and our softs going. Now we have found the golden temple. And we have to get ourselves up the steps of this temple and then inside the temple in order to truly find the goldenness of our tone. Of course, I put here, don't forget your intonation, okay? So, in week number 1, what I like to do is start loud, come to the top note, and then do a nice diminuendo all the way to the end of that note. So you'll notice that we are not necessarily adding crescendos and diminuendos right away to the first part of this practice. If you start on week 1, number 1, it's just louds and softs in the first exercise. When we move to the high register exercises, though, I want to start making things just a little bit more intense. This is where I do focus on what the embouchure is doing. So in this moment, I want to offer you what I offer some of my very beginning students when I'm thinking about embouchure. And I mean it when I say beginning students. Some of my college students get this speech as well, depending on where they come to me in their studies. If they've never had a formal flute lesson before, then I might start them with something like this. The idea here is I relate the embouchure size to straws. Now, I realize that there might be a point in time coming up here when straws do not exist anymore. So we'll wait and see what happens if that ever happens. But for right now, I find that even my young students are able to latch on to this idea. So I tell all of my students that if you go to any run-of-the-mill restaurant, if you go to an Applebee's, okay, you're gonna get a normal size straw, just a regular straw. And I gave this class one time for the Montana Flute Association. I told them that they were going to go, if they went to their Coney Islands, that this is what they were going to get. And I realized that Coney Islands are not ubiquitous. So anyone from the Midwest that recognizes Coney Islands, yes, welcome to the chat. Anyone else, Coney Islands are just like run-of-the-mill restaurants. Middle-sized straw for middle register or middle dynamic. It works both ways. That's what I like about this for young students in particular. I tell my students that if we're going to play very loud, that the straw has to get bigger. So we've all maybe been to McDonald's or to bubble tea. Those are two things that I find do tend to be universal. McDonald's straws, sometimes they're just a little bigger for some unknown reason. And then bubble tea straws are, of course, a little bigger because we have to suck the tapioca up through the straw, right? The experience of blowing through a big straw, though, I want you all to take your hand and create a nice big opening and blow through it. Chances are you don't have to push very hard to get that air through that large opening. That's your high register. Your high register, that is your loud playing. That is your loud playing. Your loud playing needs open, easy, free-blowing air, but it can't have too much pressure behind it. If it has too much pressure behind it, we're gonna go sharp. Now, vice versa, if we make our straws as tiny as we possibly can, and for my students, I tell them this is like a coffee stirring straw that you get at like a gas station or maybe a Starbucks or something like that. If we make our tiny straw and try to blow through it though, so I'm gonna blow through my little straw. In order to get the air to go through it, we need higher pressure. The air has to be moving faster. Now, if you have young students that are having a hard time connecting the dot between air speed and air volume, getting straws for them to blow through like this is actually life-changing. Because if you try to blow through your coffee-sized straw with your McDonald's size air, it's gonna go all over the place. You'll never make it work. So even though the air is moving faster, we're using less of it. Let's relate this to the exercise we're about to do now. In this exercise, we start with either our McDonald's or our middle-sized straw, and then as we do the diminuendo, we have to imagine that our lips are coming down to the size of our coffee straw and that the air is passing through it just as freely. That's the final thing I'll say about the straws, is that the idea of blowing through a straw is the idea of easily blowing the air. And at no point do I want to feel like the air isn't moving easily, even if it might be a little more difficult. Before we do this exercise, I should ask if anyone has any questions, because I literally just threw a million different pieces of information at you very quickly. So are there any questions that I can clear up before we do the exercise? Okay, good. You'll notice that I put the numbers a little bit different than I did on the last one. This is to show you that in week 4, there are only 3 days of exercises. There's 1, 2, and 3, because there's 4 different versions of this, right? For me, when I'm going through this and you see numbers that are less than 6 or less than 7, what that means is the final number you see is the number that continues through the week. To make that clear, this only has 3 exercises, 3 versions of it that happens 4 times, which means that number 3 on Wednesday, I do on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It's a shorter amount of things because as we go through the week, we're going to add exercises. I'll make that part explicitly clear after we play through this exercise, okay? So go ahead and grab your flutes again, and we're going to first start by doing the B natural to the E flat, and when we get to the E flat, we're going to diminuendo. This means that we are starting with our medium-sized straw, and as we play the E flat, we're turning the embouchure into our coffee-sized straw throughout the exercise. All right? It'll be 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, off. Breath, start on the next note and go. It'll be super clear when we start playing together. Here we go. 1, 2. So that was the very first part of this exercise. When you're practicing this on your own, please go at your own pace. I might be pushing some of you to go faster than you want to go. I might be pushing some of you to go slower than you want to go as well. We'll continue through this exercise so you can feel what a week 4 of high register would be like. So where you see my penciled number 2, hopefully you can see my cursor right here. This one we're going to do the opposite. We're going to start with our coffee size straw on the A sharp and then move it up to our McDonald's size straw on the D. So we're starting soft and crescendoing instead of loud to soft. All right, here we go. 1, 2. Good. Now I haven't addressed vibrato, and I want to let you all know in this moment that I will not be addressing vibrato in this. Vibrato is completely dealer's choice. Do it, don't do it. Everyone's going to have their own philosophy on where vibrato should and shouldn't be in warm-ups. I will tell you very quickly my philosophy. I want to be able to do it both with and without vibrato in tune. When I'm playing in the symphony orchestra and I have to put a lot of vibrato on something, it still has to be registering as in tune, meaning in spite of the vibrato, we generally need that tuner to still be green, okay? But I just played, I'm going to say the composer's name wrong, it was not Stamitz. Scarlatti. I just played a piece by Scarlatti, it wasn't Stamitz, and we decided to do performance practice and there was almost no vibrato. I want to make sure that that kind of sound can be in tune as well. Okay, so now we're going to move down here, starting on the A, C sharp, F, A, and we're going to do this all loud first, followed by all soft second. So you can see how we're starting to develop all of these different dynamics along with our pitch. Here we go. 1. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to start over here at the beginning of number 3 just to match the rest of it. 1, 2. Wonderful. Now here on number 4, we're going to do soft followed by loud. And I want to throw one more thing at you all. In this time, in this version of it, we are not going to breathe in between the two dynamics. We're going to go immediately from soft to immediately loud. So think about how you're using that beautiful breath of air in to have enough air to make it through all of this in one breath. All right, here we go. 1, 2. And if you're doing what I'm doing and you've got your tuner with you, it's going to make evident which of these is easier and which of these is more difficult for you. Okay, let me say one more thing before I open it up to more questions. What we just went through was 3 exercises. Air attack exercise, starting in our hot balloon ride, followed by the dynamic mountains, doing all of these downward intervals, both loud and soft, followed by climbing the steps to the Golden Temple to get up into our high register, and this involves diminuendos and crescendos from the onset. These 3 things combined are going to have us find that golden sound that everyone is going for. And the idea is that these 3 exercises are the first 3 days of your week. So Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, if you're starting on a Monday, I try to start on a Monday just to keep my brain together, but I know some people, Sunday is the start of their week. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I am only doing 3 of these exercises. Air attack, the dynamic exercise going down, and then our crescendos and diminuendos going up. Does anyone have any questions at this moment? Okay, I'm gonna take that as a no. If there's comments in the chat, someone make sure they say something because I can't always see the chat. Okay, so if that's all that you want out of your sound, if all you want out of your sound is gold, that's all you need. You can do those 3 exercises indefinitely. However, I'm extra, okay? I want to be the wealthiest of all flute players, which means I don't just want to open my treasure chest and find gold. I want to open my treasure chest and find diamonds. I want things to sparkle at me. So, in order to make sure that my sound has sparkle, to make sure that it's shiny and rich and full, I have to focus on the low register. And this is a quote by Mr. Moyse, a rich low register. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is my quote. My goodness, who would have thought? A rich low register is the foundation to the entire tonal palette of the flute. You'll hear a lot of people say that. The entire instrument is built on harmonics. So if you want to get very technical, play from a low C up to a B natural and then overblow it, and that's actually what the next register should sound like, and then overblow it twice, and that's actually what the third register should be, right? The fingerings that have been created on this instrument by Mr. Bim, they're to make the tone quality sound nicer, but they're not actually true fingerings all the time, if that makes sense. So we move into our low register portion, and I want you to notice that in Mr. Moyse's book, there are 16 of these exercises. So the way that I do this is when we're moving through those initial long tone exercises, because they get faster each day, because more and more notes are lumped in each day, it doesn't take as much time to go through them, which means on Thursday, when I'm moving much more quickly through that first part of the golden tone practice, that's when I add in my low register stuff so that I can have the intensity of embouchure work. And this one is actually going to take a little bit of embouchure work, but only for 4 days out of the week. So this to me is a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, meaning week 1, you're doing numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Week 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then after 4 weeks, you'll have done all 16. I do things just a little bit differently than Mr. Moyse. I do start with A as all whole notes, B as dotted half notes, C as half notes. But for those first 3, I find that if I do the repeats that he has written in his book, that it's way too intense. And by the end of this practice, doing all this long tone in the low register, because I'm really going for as soft as I can go on the pianissimo and as loud as I can go on the fortissimo, that it does tear my lips up a little bit. It gets just a little lippy for me. So for A, B, and C, I do not add repeats in. I just don't do it. On D and E, however, I do add in the repeats that Mr. Moyse suggests in the very first exercise. For time's sake, I'm not going to have us go through this entire exercise, but I do think it would be fun to go through maybe one of these lines together just so you can hear how intensely I take this soft to loud. So I'm going to put my metronome on 60, which is the metronome marking that he suggests. You can see I added in the very first part here, 60. And I mean it. I'm going to start on C, and I'm going to try to be like, I got a little crack in there, but I think you all understand what I'm going for. I'm going to try to start as soft as I can, and I'm going to let it get to be a nice, full, loud sound, and then try to take it literally back to as soft as possible with my metronome and my tuner. We will do C together. We'll slur the first 2 measures, slur 3 and 4, slur 5 and 6, but no repeats of these measures. Each note is a half note. I think it'll make sense when we start going. I know that it's complicated to say it out loud. So we'll start in line C. Here we go. 1, 2, ready? And the idea here is, of course, to, again, over-exaggerate these dynamics. Again, as I said at the beginning, some of this is very intuitive. I find that it's the flow of going through this that is the newest thing that I'm trying to offer here. Does anyone have questions about this before I move to my next slide? Okay, so now we're gonna find the rest of our gem tones here, our gemstones here, excuse me. So I teach my students that there's 2 different ways to think about intonation, okay? There is what I call to the green intonation. And all that means is I'm trying to make sure that my tuner registers every single note as green. There are 2 times that that kind of intonation is super important. The first time that that intonation is super important is if you play with a piano, because pianos have completely ruined the way that we hear harmony. I mean, completely ruined the way that we hear harmony. They're in a fixed place. Everything is tuned to the note that it is, which means it's not, your major thirds are not necessarily going to be in tune when you play them with the piano, for example. So that's the first kind of intonation. Besides playing with the piano, this is really important for orchestra auditions. I have heard of people on orchestra committees sitting behind a screen with tuners. It happens. They're going to check that tuner to make sure you're sitting generally in that tonal center. So for anyone who is on the audition circuit at this current moment, absolutely make sure that you are practicing every single day, getting every note to be green in every dynamic marking, period, the end, okay? Period, the end. However, when you sit down in the orchestra, when you sit down in your wind quintet, when you go to play with your flute choir, if you try to keep every note green, the intervals are not always going to be in tune with the people around you. This is what I call harmonic intonation. I don't mean harmonics, I just mean that we're tuning to the harmony that we're getting. So if you have a first and a second, they're very close together. They're going to be very clashy. We don't want this interval to get too big. We want it to be pretty small. Same thing with our major thirds. Major thirds should be just a little bit lower in order to accurately be in tune with the drone. Our fourths have to be perfect. Our fifths have to be a little bit big. Our sixths should also be just a little bit low. And our sevenths are reaching up to that next octave. Well, practicing this with a tuner would be kind of impossible, right? Practicing it with a drone, however, makes everything clear. Totally and completely, utterly clear. And if you look in the back of Mr. Moyse's book here, you will find literally 4 melodies. There are 4 melodies, which is how I was able to come up with this idea of a 4-week regimen for Mr. Moyse's book. So I generally speaking do this on Saturday and Sunday, day 6 and day 7, so that I'm not piling everything on too quickly. To recap again, and I'll recap again at the end, so don't worry, 3 days of 3 exercises. Then we add in low register for days 4 and days 5. Those remain. And on day 6 and 7, I add in this drone work. Here are some resources. I didn't create a slide for this. I'm sorry. So let me type some of these into the chat as well. Oops. Wrong direction. I actually can't get the chat to show up, so hopefully maybe someone else can type these in as I say them. So, number one, there is something called the tuning CD. If you've not heard of the tuning CD, you can get it on Apple Music, you can get it on Spotify, and it comes in 3 tonal centers. You can get it at 440, at 441, or at 442. So that is the tuning CD. An app that you can get on your phone is called Tunable. There's one called Tunable, and there's also one called Tonal Energy. And what I like about these apps is that you can choose the instrument that you're hearing on the drone, and the tuner itself will help you see if you're in tune. And I'll talk about the tuner in a second because it can help us a little bit here, actually. So there's Tonal Energy, Tunable, the tuning CD, and then I don't know how easy this is to find anymore, but a man named Walter White also had these fabulous tonal centers that you could get that had like a little beat and a jam behind them. So if that's your vibe, that's something that's great too. And the tuning CD, it drones perfect fifths. It drones perfect fifths. That's one of the things that makes it so exceptional. You can literally fit every note into the chord that way. So what I would do on Saturday of week 1, looking at let me read this little quote by Mr. Moyse before we go away from it. You must try all possibilities for finding the proper center and focus of the tone, like an ant moving a heavy object from his path, determined and patient. I did not say that this was going to be an exciting practice regimen, okay? I just said that it was going to be good for you. It's like the broccoli of practicing your tone, okay? I love broccoli though, so for anyone who's like me and likes broccoli, you might enjoy this. So you'll see on week 1 here, there's 2 sharps in the key signature. It starts on a D at the beginning. It ends on an F sharp. I can glean from that we're in probably some sort of D center. So for Saturday, I'll put my tuning CD on, my open 5th drone on D, and then I have this wonderful, wonderful piece of equipment that Korg makes here. It is a microphone. And what it can do is I can plug this into my tuner, clip it onto the end of my flute, and then the tuner won't register anything else. Notice that I'm talking and it doesn't see anything. It's not registering anything because it's registering here. So if you have a hard time with your ear training, if you're having a hard time hearing what in tune might be, if you're doing something like an octave or a unison in particular, I love plugging myself into this microphone just to double check my ear. It'll tell me if I'm slightly off. I can shut my eyes, listen to the drone, play the interval till I think it's in tune, and then open my eyes and look at the tuner to check my work. I don't know about any of you, but I have quite a few students who struggle in the ear training area, and I find that it actually relates more back to timbre than whether or not they can or can't hear if they're in tune. If the timbre of my note is just a little too different from the timbre of your note, it's harder maybe to hear if it's in tune. So this nice little microphone that you can get to plug into your tuner will help train your ear better for that. Okay, that for me is it. That's the whole 4-week regimen. I would do this on Saturday and Sunday of week 1. Maybe on Saturday, I do it in the octave that it's written. Maybe on Sunday, I play this actually an octave up, so I'm practicing my drone work in 2 different registers. Maybe if I'm doing this 3 months in a row, on week 1 of month 3, I do what Mr. Moyse requires below, and I transpose it into a different key as well. So you don't have to stick to the keys that he has written here. And again, this for me is the whole thing. It is starting with the air attack exercise, 7 days a week. Then my downward long tones, the dynamic mountains, 7 days a week. Then my high register, we're climbing the steps to the Golden Temple. That's the diminuendos and crescendos. Again, 7 days a week. Low register, however, I do low register as 4 days a week, so Thursday through Sunday. And then the drone work I only do on Saturday and Sunday. Now, you are allowed, obviously, I'm not telling anyone that if you choose to try this, you have to do exactly what I said. Make this work for you. It can be more, it can be less. When I start my students on this regimen, I do not hand them all of week 1 and say, now go home and do week 1. I start them with a week of air attack exercises. Then I start them with a week or 2 of the first long tone exercise. So I ease them into this. And if you have never been this specific with how you're working with your tone, you might want to ease yourself into this too. I find that full disclosure, I take a minimum of 2 weeks off every year. That's a mental health thing. 2 weeks, no flute. It goes to the shop. I don't think about it. I don't worry about it. I don't deal with it. If I come back after those 2 weeks and start running into my 4-week regimen of Moyse here, then it's going to be too intense. So I ramp up into this too. There is, before I open the floor for any last questions, one more exercise in this book. Now, because of the way that I formulate this plan for my students, I do not do this exercise with them. Everything that this exercise talks about has been covered in the rest of the book. But if you want to be extra, and every once in a while I am extra, well, every once in a while I'm just a little extra, I will add this in too. So there is an extra little morsel. Does anyone have any questions about the literal mountain of information I just threw at you? I see it, Chad. Well, I hope you all enjoyed your time with me this afternoon. I had a great time presenting this information. I love every opportunity that I get to share this with all the flute players that I could possibly muster. And I see some familiar faces on the Zoom call today, which I also very much appreciate. Again, my name is Brandon LePage. I teach at Oakland University in Michigan. I also am principal flute of the Flint Symphony Orchestra and principal flute of the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra. So I am all over the place when I am performing and traveling. And that's the other thing I like about this. I just have this book on my tablet. It's easy to take anywhere, and it's easy to memorize this process too. So if I forget the book, I don't need to worry about it. I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your Sundays. And again, I put my email in the chat. If any of you want the 1-page note sheet that I had, I am more than happy to share that with you. And I am more than happy for anyone on this call or anyone who watches this later, if it gets posted online, to email me any questions that you have about this process. I am happy to answer. Thank you all so much. I will hand it back over to Maria.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you everyone who attended today's online event. A recording of this event will be published on the NFA YouTube channel later this week. And our next online event will be next Sunday, February 2nd, and it's going to be about sparking a sense of discovery in your playing with Laura Lentz. To learn more about us, you can visit our website at nfa.org or follow us on social media. Thank you again. I hope you have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.
And thank you so much for hosting me. I appreciated this so much, so much.
Bye, Brandon.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you. Okay, lovely to meet you. I am going to go have dinner with my family for my sister's birthday.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye,
Bye.
everyone.